So we are now a few days out from the Packers-Cowboys insane game, insane ending, ends with a tie. Unfortunately, the Packers could not pull off the win in Dallas, Texas. But I want to talk about the end-of-game situation again. And the reason is because Matt LaFleur brought it up yesterday in a press conference and had some very eye-opening comments regarding the end-of-game scenario. And he goes through and describes the issues that he thinks were there, and I do think it shines a light on an unfortunate reality from this game that Matt LaFleur did not have this Packers team properly prepared for a situation like this, and he goes into detail explaining how unfortunate it was that the players weren't exactly ready to, operate and know exactly what was going on and how they should be operating in those final minutes of that game. And so, first off here, we'll start off with the first comment, and this is from a press conference he did yesterday. It's on the Packers YouTube channel if you would like to watch the entire thing. It's about 20 minutes long, and he goes into lots of different detail. But here's the first quote from LaFleur. "Where I've got to be better is to tell Jordan, hey, it's either there or throw it away, because obviously we got ourselves in a situation that we don't want to be in, where it's an on-the-ball last play attempt, which we have plays for those situations. It's just that we didn't execute the play that we had for the situation because we hadn't, in my opinion, we hadn't put our players through that enough times where it's just automatic. So it's unfortunate. It's a tough learning lesson for us, but it's one of those things that you can't just practice every once in a while. It needs to be a part of practice every week if you want our guys, because in those critical situations, you got to be flawless. I mean, it went to an on-the-ball O-zone situation, which don't come up very often. But when they come up, they matter, because it's the most critical point of the game, and to not execute that in that situation, that was tough to watch." So LaFleur admits there, saying we hadn't put our players through that enough times where it's just automatic, so it's unfortunate. And I think the thing there is I'm sort of surprised that, Matt LaFleur as the coach, they hadn't run a, end-of-game type situation there in that way enough times to where the players knew exactly what was going on and sort of how they should be operating, because in the NFL, you're going to have so many very close games. You're going to have games where it comes down to the wire, where you have one final drive where the time is ticking off the clock, and you have to, be on point and be ready to operate whatever the clock is telling you. And honestly, hearing his comments there saying that the Packers, he said we hadn't put the players through that enough times where it's automatic, you could tell watching that final drive, because there are moments where you're thinking to yourself, like, why are they going so slow, especially at the very end there, which we've all, given our thoughts on. But you look at that and it makes sense that they sort of looked like they didn't really realize that time was ticking off the clock. They didn't really realize that they needed to be moving quicker. And it sounds like the Packers just have not been practicing that enough. And then here's the next quote I want to read. And so first off, a reporter brings up the lack of urgency. And here's what LaFleur says. "The urgency that was required didn't happen previously to that as well, which gets into the process of we ran a play out of the 2-minute, and then we huddled up and we called a play. We thought they were going to be in cover 2. They played man coverage. We hit Rome on a slant, and at that point is when, in my mind, it's 2-minute. We operated out of a different 2-minute formation. So I would say this, where we have to clear up the communication is when we're not in 2-minute mode, and then you jump into 2-minute mode. Everybody on the field has to know that, and they have to operate as such. And we were operating more of our no-huddle tempo, which isn't warp speed, whereas 2-minute is gotta be warp speed, and it just wasn't. It's a bad look, quite honestly, and that's why you get a bad result as well. But it's just the communication and process have got to be cleaned up, because we can't allow that ever to happen again." And so LaFleur there is talking about this lack of urgency and the difference between a 2-minute situation versus a no-huddle situation where in the 2-minute you're moving much quicker. And it sounds like that there wasn't proper communication to allow the players to know what mode they should be in. Because LaFleur said, we have to clear up the communication when we're not in the 2-minute mode. And he said everybody on the field has to know that, and they have to operate as such. So there was just a lack of communication there between Matt LaFleur, between the players. I mean, you would hope that the players would get the understanding from LaFleur during the game of, okay, we're in this type of situation now, speed up. And even if they weren't speeding up, I don't see why LaFleur couldn't have tried to get their attention to be like, hey guys, like pick up the pace. Why are you sleepwalking right now? Why are you guys moving so slowly as this time is ticking off the clock? And so, I mean, LaFleur really just was completely honest and basically saying, which one thing you can't give him credit for in lots of these press conferences after losses is LaFleur is always willing to come out and say, yep, we have to clean that up. That's my fault. He likes to take the blame for lots of things, which I think, you don't really see coaches, throwing players under the bus a lot. Probably, not the best look there, when coaches do things like that. But at the same time, everything isn't Matt LaFleur's fault. Sometimes it is up to the players, but in this situation, at the end of the game, it's one thing if a play doesn't work, and of course, there will be criticism of a wrong play call or things like that. But I feel like things like this, when it's just urgency and it's end of game situations where it's just sort of knowing the clock and knowing what you need to do, those are things that shouldn't be that hard to have ironed out, And I would say that's more simple than, okay, did you call the right play call? Things like that. You would think urgency would be sort of on the top of the list, especially when it comes to end of games. And I just don't see how the Packers, knowing that you're going to be in a ton of close game situations, how you don't properly prepare to be in situations like the Packers were in yesterday. And now the one positive that could come out of this is that because this looked so bad at the end for the Packers, that now you would assume if they weren't practicing those end of game situations enough, they're going to be practicing those at a much higher level, you would assume, based on these Matt LaFleur comments, which in the end the season, playoffs, hopefully that should be ironed out by that point. But it's sort of unfortunate that it had to come to this point where the Packers needed to struggle at the end here and not really properly operate with the clock where it was. It's unfortunate that it needed to come to this point. But then in the end, at least the Packers see this issue, and hopefully it's an issue that can be solved going forward. And I do think when you look at Matt LaFleur in his time here in Green Bay, he's been a very good coach in my opinion. He has been one of the winningest coaches in the NFL since he took over. Just to start a coaching career as a head coach, his winning percentage, it's one of the best all time. The Packers have made the playoffs in 5 of 6 years. He did come to a very good situation with Aaron Rodgers. And then I think there was questions, can the Packers go from Rodgers to Jordan Love and do it effectively? And can LaFleur, people had asked back then, is LaFleur just a product of Aaron Rodgers? Because when you have an all-time talent like Rodgers, it may not be that hard to find a lot of success. You could probably put a lot of coaches in that situation, and they would probably find success more often than not if, as opposed to being with a lower tier quarterback. And so there were questions there, and rightly so. It's like, okay, can LaFleur have the same success with Jordan Love? And then Jordan Love comes in, and the Packers have the same success. And so I give Matt LaFleur a ton of credit for what he has done during his time here in Green Bay. And just looking at comments, watching some of those press conferences, seeing Packers fans' comments under those videos, there's a lot of frustration with Matt LaFleur, and I understand it, especially for this game. And it does beg the question, looking ahead to the future in regards to Matt LaFleur, because before the season, Packers' new president, Ed Policy, didn't decide to extend Gutekunst or Matt LaFleur. They each had 2 years remaining on their deal, and they decided not to extend them, which, I don't think you necessarily need to do that in that situation when a guy has 2 years left. But I was reading an article from Matt Schneidman who would cover that back in June, and Ed Policy had said basically that he didn't want to give these extensions before with 2 years remaining, but he also noted that he wanted to avoid a lame duck status for them as well. And so that would most likely mean that a decision will come after the season if he wants to extend, LaFleur and Gutekunst, or if maybe he wants to let them go. And so I think that for Matt LaFleur, I think that, some people have, talked about him being on the hot seat or things like that. I don't think he's on the hot seat like right now. Like, oh no, like there's a good chance LaFleur is going to go. No, this is just one loss, one mistake. Now, I do think there are some commonalities here that we've seen in times past, like this lack of urgency does seem to pop up from time to time with the Packers. Last year, it felt like there was a lack of urgency early in games, couldn't get started. Here we have this problem. But, I mean, I don't think that, if I had to make a guess right now based on how good Matt LaFleur has been, how successful he's been, getting to the playoffs, being successful with Aaron Rodgers, with Jordan Love, I would assume that he's going to be back after this season because on the one hand, it's like, okay, it'd be awesome to have a coach where they never have a situation like happened against the Cowboys where there's clearly a lack of communication. LaFleur even admits that. And then, things didn't really go exactly as you would hope. Now, it could have gone worse. It could have been a loss. It was a tie. So at least that worked out well. But coaches are going to make mistakes in these moments from time to time. I do think that's a mistake you don't want to have to see happen, but hopefully it means that there'll be improvement moving forward. But I think that for Matt LaFleur, because of how successful his offenses have been, and considering he's the play caller, I just don't know if you were, let's say after the season, let's say the Packers exit in the playoffs round one, let's say they have some other type of situation at the end of the year where there's some poor clock management or something like that. The question that Ed Policy will have to think about in his mind if he wants to bring LaFleur back is it worth taking the risk to maybe find a coach where maybe you would have more confidence in come late game situations? Maybe you feel that guy could bring more urgency. Is that worth more than what LaFleur does as an offensive coordinator? And are you willing to risk LaFleur leaving and trying to find a new play caller to pair with Jordan Love? I really just don't think it's worth the risk. And honestly, right now, I know some people wouldn't even want you to talk about, could LaFleur potentially be gone? But, I mean, I think that, when it comes to these type of conversations, I mean, this is what Ed Policy is thinking. If Ed Policy had zero questions before the season about LaFleur, and if in his mind he thought LaFleur and Gutekunst were going to be here for the next 10 years, then he could have given them an extension. But he didn't, and I don't think that it necessarily says that much because when guys have 2 years left on their deals, it's like you don't really necessarily need to make a move there or do something. So I don't think it's like I don't think his decision to do that was him saying, oh man, I'm really going to keep my eye on them this year because I don't know, they're sort of on a short leash when it comes to them staying in Green Bay. I don't think it was like that whatsoever. But because he did make those statements, this is an important year for Matt LaFleur, and I don't know what would need to happen for him to leave. But I think that he's done enough during his time in Green Bay. The success with Rodgers, the success with Jordan Love, the success of this offense consistently. I mean, they haven't been worse since LaFleur came in than the 15th best offense in the NFL scoring-wise, and that was Rodgers' first year in 2019. And besides that, you have 15th, 1st, 10th, 14th, 12th, 8th, 9th. And so my main takeaway is I think Matt LaFleur is a very good coach. But sometimes there are things that need to be cleaned up, and Matt LaFleur admitted that here. And I think for me, if going forward, we don't see a lot of these mistakes going forward, end-of-game situations, and the Packers continue to, play as we know they can, I think Matt LaFleur should stay here for the long run. I think it's easy to look at one game and come out with a takeaway and be like, man, I don't know if he should be here. And I get the questions. I think it's totally fine to ask these type of questions. I think it's good to go through it and think about it. But just my overall takeaway from what I've seen LaFleur as a coach, I think he's a very good coach. Now, if time goes by and things don't get cleaned up, maybe you start to ask more questions. But I think that right now, it's early in the season. We're only 4 games in. The Packers are 2-1-1. They've been pretty good. And all teams go through, most teams go through some bad stretches, some bad moments. And I think what it comes down to is can the Packers bounce back? Can they get some of these sloppy mistakes cleaned up when it comes to special teams problems, which may be a discussion for another day. When it comes to 2 straight games, blocked field goals, that is the thing. When you see a lot of these mistakes, it does make you think, okay, why is this happening? LaFleur definitely deserves some of the blame because I think it's top down. I think Rich Bisaccia deserves some of the blame for the special teams issues. And if you look at it, including the last playoff game from last season when Keyshawn Nixon fumbled that ball, 3 of the past 5 Packers games have included really, really bad special teams mistakes. 2 straight games, blocked field goals. You take back to the game against the Eagles in the playoffs, you have that fumble. So there are a lot of things to clean up, and while I wouldn't say that it's impossible that LaFleur doesn't return, if things like this continue to happen, if there continues to be a lack of urgency, if there continues to be communication problems, if the special teams can't get ironed out, and if the Packers were to exit early in the playoffs, there's definitely a non-zero chance of Matt LaFleur potentially being gone. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, and I don't think that this one game should lead to that happening, but, I don't think I could just sit here and say, yeah, that's impossible. Like, he's too good. Anything could happen here. So I just want to give my overall takeaways, my overall thoughts as LaFleur and about the mistakes here, and hopefully we see some of these things cleaned up moving forward. If you want more Packers content, feel free to subscribe down below. I put up Packers content throughout the week, covering news, things like that. You can also follow me on Twitter. My username is @LukeBeller3, and I post more things over there from time to time. But thank you guys for watching, as always, and I'll see you guys next time.